Today, I am inviting you into a poetic, symbolic journey through Gestalt psychology, a school of thought that reshaped how we understand perception. As Kurt Koffka wrote in Principles of Gestalt Psychology, 1935, the whole is other than the sum of its parts. That line is more than a slogan. It's a doorway into a new way of seeing. My goal is to explore how Gestalt reveals the mind as an active creator of meaning, not as a passive recorder of sensory fragments. Gestalt psychology began with an illusion. I'm Tasha Peterson. Let's dive into this. Gestalt psychology began with an illusion. In 1912, Max Wertheimer published experimental studies on the perception of movement, describing how two flashing lights created the experience of motion. He wrote, "We see movement where there is only stillness." Wertheimer, 1912. This phenomenon challenged the atomistic view of perception. Wertheimer was soon joined by Wolfgang Köhler and Kurt Koffka in Frankfurt. Their collaboration throughout the 1920s expanded this insight into a full psychological school. By 1935, with Koffka's Principles of Gestalt Psychology, the movement had become a formalized theory, a monument in the field. Gestalt was not just a theory, it was a rebellion against fragmentation. To understand the revolution, imagine three lights, A, B, and C, flashing in sequence. Physically, nothing moves, but perceptually, something does. This simple illusion revealed something profound. The mind refuses to see isolated flashes. It insists on continuity. It insists on story. Wertheimer's 1912 study showed that the perception is not a passive recording of stimuli. It is an active construction of meaning. Gestalt psychologists identified four foundational principles, what Koffka, 1935, called the laws beneath every act of seeing. Emergence, we perceive the whole before the parts. We see a dog before we see the individual strokes of paint. Reification, the mind adds structure that isn't present. Edges appear where none are drawn, a phenomenon later explored in depth by Kanizsa in his 1976 work on subjective contours. Multistability, some images refuse a single interpretation. Rubin's 1915 vase, the vase that becomes faces, is the classic example. The law of simplicity. The mind resolves ambiguity toward the most stable, coherent form. Koffka called this the law of good form. These principles reveal that perception is not a mirror of reality. It is a negotiation with it. Wertheimer's 1923 paper, Untersuchungen für Lehre von der Gestalt, formed 6 laws that described how the mind organizes chaos into meaning. These laws, proximity, similarity, continuity, closure, figure/ground, and I can't say that. Prägnanz, show they're not optional. They're the default architecture perception. They show that the mind is constantly grouping, simplifying, and shaping the world into coherent form. Wertheimer in 1923 demonstrated that proximity alone creates structure. 25 dots become 3 groups simply because they are near each other. As my slide says, space between things is not emptiness, it's the language of belonging. We use this principle constantly in reading, in design, and even how we interpret social relationships. Similarity organizes perception through shape, color, and weight. Circles call to circles, gold calls to gold. Even when spacing is identical, typography demonstrates this beautifully. Bold words form their own visual sentence. As my slide puts it, the mind is a poet, it rhymes what it sees. This principle also comes from Wertheimer's 1923 work. Continuity tells us that the eye does not stop at the crossing. We follow the smoothest path, completing curves even when interrupted. Closure shows that the mind draws the line the world refuses to finish. The Kanizsa triangle, described in Kanizsa's 1976 paper on subjective contours, is the classic example. We see a triangle that isn't actually drawn. Together, these laws show that perception is active construction, not passive reception. Rubin's 1915 vase demonstrates that figure and ground cannot coexist in awareness. When we see the faces vanish. When we see the faces, the vase disappears. This principle reveals how attention shapes reality. Perception, like meaning, depends on which story we choose to tell. Modern neuroscience confirms what Gestalt psychologists observed a century ago. Lamé in 1988 found that about 87% of neurons in the visual cortex respond to grouping cues consistent with Gestalt laws. Qui and von der Heydt in 2007 used fMRI to show distinct neural signatures for figure versus ground in V1 and V2, and Baker et al. In 2020 demonstrated that convolutional neural networks replicate human Gestalt grouping. Gestalt has moved from illusion to biology to computation. Gestalt is not just a theory, it is autobiographical. We group friends into social clusters, proximity and similarity. We hear melodies, not frequencies, emergence. We follow trails on maps, continuity. We recognize obscured faces, closure. We focus on one voice in a crowded cafe, figure/ground. We experience aha moments, Prägnanz. And as my slide says, to understand Gestalt is to understand the autobiography of your own perception. Gestalt continues to shape design, therapy, and artificial intelligence. UX designers use Gestalt laws to guide attention. Gestalt therapy, developed by Fritz Perls in 1951, applies the principle of wholeness to human experience. And machine vision models are being trained to replicate Gestalt grouping. From Vienna train cars to neural networks, Gestalt endures. I'll close with my final line. See not the parts, see the pattern they become.